Welcome to the Dynasty Dads podcast. Football, rankings, debates, dad stuff with your host, Justin Williams and Matt Renshaw.
Matt, we have a special guest today. Kyle Francis, known on Twitter at FranchiseKF.
Yes. He did a piece on Montgomery that I saw that I loved. I was like, we have to have this guy on the show. He knows what he's talking about. He does some real in-depth look at different players. I'm super excited to have him on.
Went out and threw out the big bucks, and we brought him in. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
Welcome. So Kyle, first off, let's talk about you. Tell us about yourself. What are you working on? Where your listeners can find your work? Just go ahead. Just let us have it.
Yeah, so I do a couple different things. I work with Dynasty Football Factory, and I kind of work in two capacities with them. The first is working with Debbie prospects. So I'm not familiar. Don't know how familiar all your listeners are going to be with Debbie prospects, but it's just pretty much younger college prospects before they go to your rookie drafts. I'm looking at leagues where you can draft players that are currently in college that may be a few years out from the NFL. So just starting to scout those players. And then I also do work specifically, not with NFL fantasy, but actually with college fantasy. So just all 130 teams in college football, just playing in fantasy leagues with them, which is really different, really challenging, really fun. And then I also work with the Dynasty Command Center and specifically work with them, do stuff with Debbie prospects there again. And then I worked with them on putting together specifically a rookie guide for this 2019 class. And I'm sure we might touch on a couple of those guys here today.
Absolutely, man. College fantasy football.
That I imagine that's a lot harder than 130 teams as opposed to 32 teams would be a little more.
Yeah, I kind of when I describe it to people, I say it's probably like NFL fantasy before Twitter. Like what I mean, like information is somewhat obsolete. Like you actually, if you work harder, you'll win more, whereas that's probably the case in NFL fantasy, but not as much just because there's just so much like uniformity in terms of there's so much data, there's so much information. You can not know a lot and still win in NFL, and in college fantasy, if you're not one of the most educated in your league, you're not going to win.
That's nuts. How many people do you have in a league? Like, is it a normal 10, 12 team league?
Oh man, I'm in some crazy ones. I'm on the far extremes of the fringes here. So I have one league in particular. I think there's 12 or 14 owners, and you have 50 guys on your roster.
Oh man!
So at any time you're talking, between 600 and 700 players rostered. And in this particular league, they actually, once they graduate, they feed into your NFL team. So it's a really, really cool format where you're kind of having to build this massive roster for guys who are producing in college, and then you want to also have them where they can come up and produce in the NFL. So that's my favorite format. That's
cool.
Really neat.
That's cool, yeah.
So let's talk about the article or the blurb, if you will, that kind of put you on our radar. You did a really nice depth piece on David Montgomery on Twitter, right, at FranchiseKF. We love the analysis, and you can tell you went like super deep on him. Is he your RB1 for this class?
I would say right now, before the combine, as we're recording this a couple days before, I would say he's probably my 1B. And the reason why I say that, the two backs that I like most are Josh Jacobs out of Alabama and then David Montgomery from Iowa State. And the reason why I would say he's 1B right now is because I don't think the combine's necessarily going to be a huge friend of his. I don't think it's going to hurt him necessarily, but I don't think that he's going to be a guy that's going to just have unreal testing numbers that all of a sudden is going to have a value jump. And I'm also more confident that Josh Jacobs is more likely to be the first running back taken. I would put my money on that right now. I don't foresee Montgomery necessarily being in the position to be the first running back taken. So just accounting for draft capital, and projecting a little bit, I would say that he's slightly below Josh Jacobs for me, but definitely if he's not my 1B, he's my 2. So
if he ends up in Kansas City, he sees a nice bump.
Yeah, if he ends up in Kansas City, then he's going to be back and be right there. He could end up back at 1 for me.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of debate as to who the wide receiver 1 is in this class, mostly between Harry and Metcalf. Does one stand out to you, or do you have someone else as your wide receiver one?
I actually do. I actually have Kelvin Harmon as my wide receiver one. He's a receiver from North Carolina State, and if you haven't watched him play, he's a similar big-bodied receiver, probably in between Harry and DK in terms of athleticism and explosiveness. I think the advantage that he has over both of those other guys is he's a bit more refined in his game, so a bit more technically sound than both the other guys. And I think that's the one thing with wide receiver is I tend to really pay attention to how good a route runner a player is, because you can get by in college and have just outstanding athleticism. But when you get to the NFL, if you're not a proficient route runner, it's going to take a little bit of time to get up to speed. And I just think he has he's more advanced than both of those other players in that area. And so for me, he's a guy that I've liked for quite a long time, and I think he's going to have the draft capital to support him. I think he's very likely going to be a top 50 pick.
Now I'm going to go off script a little bit here, but we've heard for quite a while that the 2019 class is down. Is that something you would agree with? What are your kind of thoughts on the class as a whole?
Yeah, I actually just did another podcast recently, and I disagreed on that as well. I just don't subscribe to the notion that the class is down. One reason why I think it could be perceived to be down is because it's so different than what we've seen in years past. We've been really fortunate over the past few years specifically to have such talented running back classes where the first round of rookie drafts and really early on in NFL drafts, it's just has such a high volume of impact running backs. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case here. So I think for a lot of people that are saying that it's down, it's because if they've invested in wide receivers early in the past couple of drafts, they've been burnt a little bit. You know, it takes usually a few more years for a wide receiver to make an impact than a running back. So I would say that if I'm looking at the class as a whole, I would say the quarterback class is maybe a little bit down. 3 guys I think you could get excited about that are going to have the draft capital and talent to be fantasy viable. Then at running back, I think that's where things get pretty dicey compared to years past. I think that there's probably going to be a lot of running backs that are overdrafted in rookie drafts, but I think a lot of the talent actually in this running back class is with guys who are more specialists, maybe pass catching specialists, could have a role similar to a guy like James White with the Patriots, where you're not asking them to run much, but they can be involved in the passing game. So I think those are going to be guys that are going to be available later on in rookie drafts. And I think the real talent comes in both the top end talent and the depth of talent at wide receiver and tight end. I think this is the best wide receiver and tight end class that we've seen in probably 5 years or more. Really, really good classes for those. And, in particular, wide receiver, I just was recently going through and trying to make a top 20 of the top 20 wide receivers that I liked. And it was really hard for me to narrow it to 20. There were 35 guys that I could name that I said, yeah, there's a legitimate shot they could be a viable fantasy player. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see come NFL draft time that there's going to be a lot of day 3 players that I think actually end up maybe kind of usurping the roles of fringe wide receivers who are veterans in the league now. So I disagree that it's a bad class. It's a different class, but it has a lot to offer.
I completely agree with that. I really do. I love the wide receivers in this class. It's speaking of love, Matt over here is a huge Noah Fant fan.
I love Noah Fant.
It's ridiculous. What are your thoughts on him? Is he Gronk 2.0? Is he even the best tight end in the class?
Yeah, I don't know that he is. He could end up being that way from a fantasy standpoint. I think he's just such an exceptional athlete. He's about to just absolutely annihilate the combine. There's reports that he has a 42-inch vertical, that he did a short shuttle that's sub 4 seconds, and that he has a 10-yard split that was better than Saquon Barkley's. So if he truly does post those types of numbers, I mean, we're going to be looking at a 99th or 100th percentile athlete at the position historically. So that's a great place to start. In terms of Gronkowski, I mean, we all know that's really high praise to give that. And as odd as it is, I actually think the guy who could most draw the Gronkowski comparisons would actually be his teammate, TJ Hawkinson.
Yep.
And the reason why I say that is just because of Hawkinson's blocking ability. And I think that's one of the things about Gronk that has made him so special is, even if he's not making his impact felt in the past game, as he's kind of, petered out a little bit here later on in his career. I mean, the guy's still a menace blocking and just absolutely ruthless. And I think that's what Fant does better than a guy like Gesicki last year, who's like a ballerina. But I think that a guy like Hawkinson, his blocking ability is just more along the Gronk level. So I think that there's 3 tight ends that I could, depending on landing spot, I could have as my tight end one in this class, and that's both the Iowa guys, Fant, Hawkinson, and then Smith out of Alabama is another guy that I think is going to have a really, really good combine and probably has a blend of the athleticism of Fant and the blocking ability of Hawkinson. So he's kind of a blend of both of those other guys. So I'm really excited about the tight end class as a whole, and all of those guys are guys that I think are going to be highly coveted tight ends in the years to come.
I don't know if I can love Fant anymore, but if he goes out and puts up those numbers, he's 101, right? Like
he's gonna put up crazy numbers. I can say that I can say that with a lot of confidence. The thing that's interesting, and even examining him and Hawkinson last year, I didn't realize this until I just did an in-depth study on them. Hawkinson actually outsnapped him by 20 snaps per game. So he was on the field 20 more snaps per game than Fant was, and a lot of that was because of his blocking prowess. And it's actually surprising, but Hawkinson outproduced him this year, and I think that a lot of times that's just a product of, if you're on the field, then you're going to have more opportunities to make catches. And so I think that it's really interesting to see a guy like Hawkinson, who may not be the same type of athlete, but because he can block the way he can, I'll be really curious to see how he's utilized and who drafts him.
One of the here's how much that Matt loves Fant. Matt mentioned months ago if you're a team that traded for the 101 in your dynasty leagues and you have a shot, you don't really have many holes. You did pretty well. You made a nice run.
Contender.
Yeah, a contender. But you traded for that 101 at some point, fell into your lap. Matt actually said that you could draft Noah Fant 101 and it would make sense this year, which usually you can't draft a tight end at 101. I think with landing spot, Matt might be right.
Yes.
I'm kind of on board with that.
It's rare for you to say that.
Yeah, it is rare. It is rare. But he's that kind of athlete, though. He really is. What are there any underrated players that you like that are just not getting any hype at all pre-combine?
Yeah, there are. I'll name a couple different players at a few different positions. The first would be Alexander Madison, who's a running back out of Boise State. He's kind of projecting right now to be a middle round rookie pick. And then James Williams is a player that I specifically could envision a role, like I mentioned earlier, to James White. He was a running back at Washington State for Mike Leach. So he played in the air raid offense, and that required him to be a really active pass catcher. He actually leaves after 3 years, and he has 202 career catches as a running back.
Wow.
And that will make him, from day one, the most productive running back in the NFL from day one. So really interesting guy. I'm not seeing him really show up at all right now on rookie drafts. So if you're in the 4th and 5th round range, he's going to get drafted. His combine will probably be pretty good for him. He's a guy that I'd be really targeting late. If I had a lot of leagues, I'd be looking for him everywhere in the 4th and the 5th. 2 wide receivers that I like. The first is Emmanuel Hall, and he's a wide receiver from Missouri. And so if you guys have watched Drew Lock at all, or any of his films, and you've seen some of the deep bombs that he's thrown, it's probably an 80% chance that it's Hall on the deep end of it. And if you guys remember DJ Shark from last season, he was a really, really good athlete at the combine. Wasn't super productive at LSU, but he was, a potentially really big, good deep threat. That's how I think Hall could be. He played most of the season with an injured groin, so his production wasn't as great. He almost had a throwaway season, but if you go back and look to his season prior, he was really, really good. He's going middle late rounds in rookie drafts right now. I think he's probably more closer to a round 2 pick. The next player would be Preston Williams, the receiver from Colorado State. He's a former 5-star high school recruit who went to Tennessee, and he's had legal troubles sort of at every stop and just had some immaturity issues. And it actually caused him to get disinvited from the combine, so he's not going to go there. And it's really too bad because he's going to probably test at his pro day now, and he's going to put up some really good numbers. But he was a super productive player this season when he finally found his way onto the field. I actually just saw Mel Kiper listed him as a potential first-round target in the NFL draft.
Wow.
And he's going right now in, again, 4th or 5th round of rookie drafts. You can have him right now, and he's going to stay a little bit under the radar because of him not going to the combine. So he's a guy that I'm going to be targeting. He's not going to go in the first round of the NFL draft. He's not going to go till day 3, my guess would be. But he would still be a guy that I would absolutely take a shot on late in drafts.
Kind of like an Antonio Callaway.
I'm sorry?
Kind of like an Antonio Callaway.
Yeah, so, something like that. I think that Callaway actually went. Did he go in the 4th round, 3rd or 4th?
3rd or 4th round, yeah.
Yeah, and so I actually think his upside, his potential is actually even higher than a guy like Callaway's. Even just because he's like DK Metcalf, in a lot of ways, and the ways that he wins and his build and everything like that. But he's going to be a lot cheaper version. So it actually wouldn't surprise me if a team has DK Metcalf high on their board, if they miss on him or if they choose to pass, that they don't look for him like early day 3 or something like that. And then 2 tight ends from the class. Now, these are the guys that are going to be tight end 4 and 5 for me, aside from the 3 guys that I just mentioned. Jay Sternberger from Texas A&M and Isaac Nada from Georgia. Sternberger had a crazy productive season. He came over from a junior college, and he was one of those productive tight ends in the country this year. Good blocker, really good receiver, good off the field. And then Isaac Nada is a former 5-star tight end, and I've actually done some research on former 5-star high school recruits. There have only been 6 in the history of Rivals.com, and Nada will be the 6th. And all 5 of the tight ends that have gone before him in the NFL, the latest they've been picked is the 29th pick of the 2nd round. So all 5-star tight ends before him have either gone in the 1st or the 2nd round of the NFL draft. He's a guy that never got the ball at Georgia just because they didn't throw it to him. But every time they almost did throw it to him, he was productive and made catches. So he's a guy that I think is flying way under the radar right now. I'm seeing him go in the 4th and the 5th round of rookie drafts right now. And I think that there's a good chance he could get drafted, maybe even by like a team like Dallas on day 2, and could be a really good fit there. So those are a couple tight ends that I really like as well.
Now I've heard those names, but I am a Dallas fan, and I'm like researching, like, okay, I don't think we're going to get one of the top 3. So who else can we get? And both of those names have been on my short list. So
yeah.
Dallas is going to get a wide receiver the first 2 rounds.
No, they are not. They don't have a first-round pick. They did. They got Amari Cooper with their first-round pick.
Are there any overrated guys that you think will get drafted too high?
There are, and I think a couple will be a result of the combine, and the first most specifically is the Ohio State wide receiver Paris Campbell. He had a really, really productive season. He caught like 90 balls and was really productive. Hadn't really done a whole lot until this year. He's about to absolutely annihilate the combine, though. He's gonna be great in every area, and he's gonna test out like an elite athlete. I think he's just that. I think he's an elite athlete, not necessarily an elite wide receiver. He's really likely going to go day 2 in the NFL draft. He's just a bit more of a project that I'm gonna be looking for. So he's a guy that I think could go earlier than what my preference would be in this wide receiver class. And then another wide receiver, speaking of underutilized Georgia players, he's been pretty polarizing on Twitter. Hopefully you guys have been able to avoid some of the unpleasant discourse between warring tribes on Twitter, but Riley Ridley is a guy that he's being mocked by NFL analysts to go day 2. That's earlier than I'm going to take him. I don't dislike his game. I just think that there's enough holes in his profile, and again, there's enough talent in this wide receiver class that I'm going to pass on taking him anytime soon. He's just not the type of guy that I'm going to look for.
Yeah, his brother helped him out a little bit there. I think the Ridley name is what helps him.
Oddly enough, his Christian name is Calvin, so it's Calvin without the L, and it was too similar to his brother Calvin's name, so he changed it from Cavin to Riley. So that's a fun fact about him. You can call him Cavin, and everyone will know you're an OG. A couple other guys, Marquise Brown. The news just broke about him. He's the really dynamic and petite wide receiver from Oklahoma.
Fast guy.
News just broke that he has had Liz Frank surgery on his foot. And I actually retweeted something that I read from studies done by a medical doctor about how damaging that injury is for offensive skill players.
Isn't that?
I don't want to say it's a total death sentence, but it is extremely damaging. For me, my concern with Brown, it's not his skill set or his game, it's how small he is. He would be the smallest wide receiver that's ever been fantasy viable. He'll get compared a lot to Tyreek Hill. I think he's significantly smaller and less explosive than Tyreek Hill, and then now he has this injury to boot on top of it. I'm still seeing him mocked right now in NFL drafts in the first round. I honestly think that's because they haven't done enough research, with all due respect to those people doing that. I just think after this injury and, if all he can do at the combine is weigh in and he's 5'9", 165 pounds, there's no chance he's going in the first round. I think it's more likely he could fall to day 3 given this injury. So he's a guy that I'm going to be passing on as well. A few running backs, his teammate, Rodney Anderson. And Rodney Anderson is a guy that I would have had mocked. I actually did mock him before the season in a rookie draft to be a first-round pick. But unfortunately, he just incurred his 3rd serious injury since he's been at Oklahoma. Now on his sheet at Oklahoma, he has a broken leg, a broken neck, and a torn ACL in 4 seasons.
Wow.
And he's also had a sexual assault charge that was dismissed, but it's another question he's going to have to answer for NFL teams.
Right.
So I think, unfortunately, the injury bug has just bit too much that he kind of has the profile of Mr. Glass for me. So I'm going to avoid him. I think he's got more of a third down pass catching back role, but I don't think he's going to get the draft capital spin on him that a lot of people on Twitter are speculating right now. And I just can't trust that injury history. So unfortunately, he's a player that I really liked, but I'm going to avoid for those reasons. And then I'll finish up with a couple other running backs. And this kind of goes against the grain for me in terms of what I'm normally looking for. And I'm generally really impressed by productive SEC running backs. And both of these next guys, I don't necessarily dislike them, but I just don't think that where I'm seeing them being taken right now in some rookie drafts and rookie mock drafts is a little bit high for my taste. I'm seeing both of these guys, Travion Williams from Texas A&M and Benny Snell from Kentucky. I'm seeing both of them as fringe end of first round, top half of second round rookie picks. And that's just earlier than I'm going to go on either of those guys. I believe neither of them are going to be selected until day 3. I think the biggest issue for Williams is going to be he's going to be on the small side of things. If I'm taking a running back in the first 20 picks of a rookie draft, I want to feel really confident that they're going to have the potential to be a feature back. And I just think with his size, he's going to be a bit pigeonholed into being a valuable committee member. And so as such, in fantasy drafts, I just think his value diminishes a little bit for my taste. And then lastly, Benny Snell is a player that I've loved having on my college fantasy teams because he's been such a workhorse and he's been so productive. But I just think he was born 10 or 15 years too late. I think he's your prototypical, 1980s, power back that you just want to have and eat a bunch of touches and wear down a defense. But he doesn't provide a whole lot as far as a pass catcher goes, and that's really important to me when evaluating running backs. I want you to be able to show that you can contribute in the passing game. It's just an extra down to be on the field, and targets for a running back are more valuable than carries. So for me, he's just another guy that I like him, but I just don't know that he has the requisite athleticism, nor is he probably going to have the draft capital that I'm seeing speculated. So those are all guys that I think that I'm either not going to buy into them despite perceived draft capital, or guys that I just don't think are going to get the draft capital that they're being reported to have right now.
Yes,
that makes sense.
Snell's been pretty polarizing from what I've seen. I mean, you either love him or you hate him. You mentioned Ridley. I think that's Snell for at least you talked about the Twitter war of the sides, and that's one that I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I love
I
Snell.
think he'll have a couple different schools of thought. Not a lot of people are kind of lukewarm on him. I'm more lukewarm, I would say. Like I don't dislike him. I think that there's a lot that he does well, and he's sort of been undersold at every stage of his career, and he's still, outperformed expectations. But I just don't know that he has the skill set that I'm just jumping up and down to have.
I think Snell is swell. Ryan, before we let you go, I just got one last question. I would like to know who your favorite player is from the class. I don't care about position. I don't care about who you think is going to go first or whatever. Who's the best? I just want to know who is your favorite player from this class.
Well, spoken like a dad, true to form on the podcast, you can't have one favorite. You have to name several of them. So I'm going to go with a couple different quarterbacks, and I promise I'm not always this chalky. Believe it or not, I know we haven't interacted for very long, the three of us, but these have all been guys that I've been talking about and or drafted as far back as 2 years or more ago. So these are guys that I've had a lot of affinity for years. So two quarterbacks are going to be the first two quarterbacks selected. It's going to be Dwayne Haskins from Ohio State and Kyler Murray from Oklahoma. I'm so grateful that Kyler Murray decided to play football. I know that's another polarizing conversation, and he kind of breaks the mold in terms of what we've expected, but there are very few players that are more exciting and more polarizing in a positive way than Kyler Murray for me. And so any quarterback that can run the way he can and still be that type of passer is who I want on my fantasy teams. And then jumping over to running back, we already touched on a couple of them, Josh Jacobs from Alabama and David Montgomery from Iowa State. And then lastly, another player that we talked about, my wide receiver one, Kelvin Harmon. Those are the five guys that no matter where they end up, just purely as a fan, I'll, I don't necessarily buy jerseys, but I'll buy a graphic tee or something for them and root for them.
Wow. I think it's safe to say that you know your stuff. He just laughs.
I had no idea that college fantasy football was a thing.
I know it was a thing. I just didn't know we'd ever talk to somebody that participated in it.
And that knows is a lot about it.
The podcast has either reached a new high or a new low.
We're all degenerates here in one way or another. So at Franchise KF is where you can find him. Any more information like that? And before we let you go, is there anywhere else that our listeners can connect to you other than Twitter?
That's gonna be it. If you're more interested specifically in a couple of the projects that I mentioned that I'm working on, how I get to know these players so well is I start evaluating a lot of them in high school, and so I work with a group on something called the Debbie Watch, and we actually just released it. It's on sale now. It's a $15 publication, and it includes 290 players from incoming freshmen all the way up to rising seniors in college. And so we kind of go through and we profile all of them. We rank them. We have them in tiers. We have, all their statistics. It's the most ridiculous labor of love, that you can have in the football world. So that's something that I have been working really, really hard on with a group of other guys. That's something that I have available. And then other than that, I'm a member of the Dynasty Command Center, and I do a little bit of consulting in terms of rookie and Debbie players. But I'm pretty much very college football focused all the time, and then it just happens to have a carryover to the NFL.
Kyle, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you guys so much. Enjoyed coming on and talking with you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for hanging out with us on another episode of the Dynasty Dads podcast. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Dynasty Dads. Visit us at our website, dynastydads.com, for articles, news, and notes, Dynasty Dads gear, and more.